Okay, let's get started. Tell me a little bit about the National Center on Disability in Journalism. How did
Yeah.
it get started?
Actually, it started some years ago by a woman who just got interested in this topic and kind of just as a passion project brought together a group of people to start educating journalists about how to cover disability better. And about, 16 years ago, she had been moving all around the country and kind of trying to keep up with the center and decided it would be a good idea to find a university who wanted to take over the center. So she came to Arizona State University and to the Cronkite School and said, "Would you be interested in this?" And we said yes, because we thought this was a need that nobody else was really addressing. So we took over the center, like I said, about 16 years ago, and we've grown it from there.
Cool. That's awesome. So, what services do you provide at your organization? Um, like how, what services do you provide with regards to journalism and other related aspects of the program?
Yeah, I mean, we're very focused on what we can do to help journalists do a better job covering disability. And there's really two things going on there. One is more coverage. We'd like to see more coverage of disability. We think it's a important topic and there's a large audience for disability coverage. And we also just would like to see journalists include people with disabilities more in any kind of coverage. In the same way that you would be inclusive of other groups, you would be inclusive of people with disabilities. So one is grow the coverage. And then the second is just to do a better job covering disability. I think a lot of journalists, and I worked in newsrooms for 20 years, and I think a lot of journalists just feel uncomfortable covering disability. They're afraid they're going to make a terrible mistake. They're going to embarrass themselves. They don't know enough about it. And so they kind of stay away from it. So we think if we can make journalists more comfortable and, give them information, that they'll cover it more and do a better job of it. So to help, what do we do specifically? We have a disability language style guide, I should say. And that's used all over the world. It's been translated now into several languages. And basically, for a long time, the Associated Press, which has a style guide that's used by journalists around the world, didn't have very many references to disability. So it wasn't very helpful for people covering disability. AP has done better with their last update last year. They're doing much better with that, and they in fact consulted us when they were updating their style book on disability language. But we have a guide that goes deeper and is broader than what the AP offers. So a lot of people will turn to us for help on choosing the right language to describe disability. And then we offer an international contest each year that recognizes the best disability reporting around the world. And this year we just added a student contest, which is exciting. So we can recognize student journalists who are doing a good job and give them some reinforcement, hopefully, to keep doing that kind of work when they go into the profession. We also offer an experts list where journalists can go and find various experts on various kinds of disability and issues related to disability. And we do training for not just news organizations, but media types of organizations around the country who are interested in how do I cover this better. So I think that was sort of a long answer, so I'll stop there.
Oh, no, no, no. It's all good. Um, it's yeah, that's pretty cool. So if I could just ask, what are some of the core values of your program? How do you sort of integrate journalism and disability together?
Yeah, it's a really good question because we are very clear that we're not an advocacy organization. other than we want to advocate for better journalism, right? So we're not advocating or presenting points of view specific to any disability group. What we're trying to do is bring a journalistic perspective to it, with the core value being report accurately and inclusively. And that, is a core value for journalism, right? Cover the uncovered, give voice to the voiceless, and do it well, do it accurately. And so those are what guide us. We're trying to help journalists do those things.
Cool. Yeah. Um, as a journalist myself, having learned through that, I learned, just kind of the main core values as a journalist and try
Yeah.
to like uphold those values in my work that I do. Um, yeah. But if I could just like move on and ask, how are you guys involved in the community? Like, do you guys have any stakeholders that you partner with closely in your efforts, with journalism and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, we have an advisory board of amazing journalists and communications professionals who have had various experiences with disability and also various journalism backgrounds. So, and they work with other groups, so that helps us sort of incorporate in a larger sense in the community. And then we also have partnered with the Ford Foundation. The Ford Foundation's been doing quite a lot related to disability, and they've helped provide some funding to us. We've worked closely with the New York Times and a number of other journalism organizations. But in recent years, last couple of years, we've also been doing a lot of work with people who are in sort of the communications business, but not strictly journalism. So, for example, a hospital communications department or team, and who they produce content. And they need to be educated and educate themselves on how to do that well. They're dealing with disability quite a lot. Some sports groups and some marketing PR types of groups. So there's quite a broad interest there. One of our board members is working right now on trying to jumpstart an organization for journalists with disabilities. And we haven't been a membership organization of that kind. Ours has been very education based. But I do think there's a big need for that. I have gotten lots of requests over the years from journalists who feel like they need a better support system. And also people who are looking for jobs in journalism and facing obstacles. So that I think is a really big need. And Kara Reedy on our board is working on that program right now. So it's sort of affiliated with us, but we're not driving it.
Cool. Yeah, that's amazing. Kind of like the things that you're doing in the community. If I could just like ask, like how does your organization specifically tackle the stigma of disability, particularly in the media? What are some of the ways that journalists can better cover people with disabilities and like the coverage about them? Because I know there has to be some sort of level of, you have to like be very careful of the language that you use and how you cover. So if you could just expand on that a little.
Sure. And, and it goes beyond language. I mean, it goes to what are the stories that are not being covered that we should be covering. And then it extends to, so how do we frame those stories? And we do talk a lot about framing of stories. We talk about disability porn, and there are different views about disability porn. I mean, there are some people a number of people within the disability community would say, look, I'd rather you did the story on, the Down syndrome girl named Homecoming Queen than ignore us entirely. So there are different feelings about that, but we would prefer, let's do these stories, but let's frame them in a way that is respectful and that includes the voices of people with disabilities. So one of the things we talk a lot about is that journalists tend to write about people with disabilities without giving them full voice in stories. And sometimes that can be a challenge. when you're talking about intellectual disabilities, for example. That can be a challenge, but it can be done. And so there are, in fact, there's some really creative ways, people are working on these kinds of things. So we want to make sure that when you're writing a story that deals with disability, that the people who have the firsthand experience are front and center in those stories and have full voice. And you're not just talking to, parents or medical professionals or caregivers. And I've met very few people with disabilities who weren't perfectly comfortable talking for themselves. So that's one of the things that we try to drill home. We talk about visuals. There are lots of choices with visuals that can be stereotyping a group of people or presenting them in a negative light, or just maybe the better term is just not a full light, right? You're not just your disability, you are a person. And images are an important part of communicating that. So we deal some with images. We talk a little bit about accessibility in terms of, what you should be doing on, with photos, with captions, with video transcripts, that kind of thing. We don't do a lot with that, but we try to make sure people are aware of, look, you need to make sure your website's accessible, your content is accessible. So those are some of the things that we, in addition to the language issues, which we do a lot with language.
Yeah, that's cool. It's like I said, it's really cool, like on some of the things that you're doing in your efforts. But I would also think that journalism is an important part of like democracy. Like if I could just like ask, how can people with disabilities like be more represented in a democratic society? I don't know if you can answer that.
Yeah, it's a big question. I think advocacy is important, and I think people with disabilities are actually pretty good at advocating for themselves. But sometimes I think it's like, oh, the media, and let's just write them off. They're going to get it wrong. They're not our friends or whatever. And I do think that journalists want to do the right thing, and that we all have to work to educate each other. And so and sometimes all of us think, oh, well, why didn't they do that story? And we assume they knew about it and didn't do it. I think you just have to be careful about those kind of assumptions. So, follow journalists on Twitter, send emails, suggest story ideas, ask somebody out for coffee. I mean, a lot of this is just creating those kind of relationships, and from that building awareness and interest, because I do think journalists are interested in this. I think they just, for the most part, just don't know how to go about getting started.
Yeah, I think that's important.